He comes from Frontier Weather, which was acquired by WDT this year in September. He will continue to provide the same services as before, just under the WDT umbrella. Prior to starting at Frontier Weather, he worked as a lead meteorologist at Williams Energy in Tulsa, Oklahoma from 1999 to 2003. Primary duties include daily forecast preparation, communication with power, gas, and oil traders, and weather broadcasts on Energy News Live. His specialties include product development, web programming, advanced Microsoft Office, including VBA scripting, weather forecasts, and database management. Last but not least, our very own Michael Matonis will be presenting an overview of Everbridge's smart weather platform. He is a senior sales engineer manager at Everbridge. He's been here for over 4 years, and prior to Everbridge, he worked in web content in the web content management space, and he is a Lehigh graduate. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to our speakers. Steve, you may begin.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for everybody. We're going to start off talking about the winter 2016-17 forecast. And the main question this year is, will winter return, or are we going to have a continuation of the extended extreme warmth we have seen going all the way back to last winter? So looking back at last winter,
Steve,
you can see...
Excuse me,
yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Unfortunately, we can't see, you're not sharing your screen, so we cannot see it.
Okay. Is it displaying okay now?
Yep. Oh, it
okay.
just went away. There we go. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. So again, we'll look back at last winter here first. You can see that the map on the left shows rankings from last winter. The country as a whole was the warmest on record for last winter, and New England especially, every single state there set all-time record highs for the December to February period. So we had widespread warmth last winter, also quite a bit of rainfall, not unusual for a strong El Nino that we had last year. And the pattern was, again, dominated by that strong El Nino last year. We had a strong Pacific jet stream that basically blasted mild air across the country for pretty much the duration of the winter season. Again, quite a bit of rainfall came with that as well, but with the cold air being limited, snowfall was also limited across most of the country with the exception of the one major East Coast storm we saw in January last year. So the question is now, we're going to see that change heading into this year. But before we do, we'll look at the summer as well. This pattern that we had last winter pretty much has been, in terms of the warmth, has been in place ever since last winter. This summer also was the warmest on record for the country as a whole. The Midwest saw the focus of the heat, so not quite as far east as it was in the winter, but again, the entire country running above normal, and actually half the country saw that one of their top 5 warmest summers on record. So certainly a very warm summer for most of the country. Again, quite a bit of rainfall across parts of the Midwest, but we did see that strong drought develop across the Southeast, and also the West trended drier again. And so that may be a focus as well going forward in the next year or so to see whether or not the strong or persistent drought across California and the Southwest does in fact become worse again. Now looking at the current fall season, again, not a whole lot of change in the pattern. The map on the left is the current projection for the entire September to November fall period. Once again, most of the country running well above normal, on pace for potentially another record-setting season across the U.S. as a whole. However, we have seen cold air across portions of the world. We've had a very strong negative Arctic oscillation that developed during the month of October. We actually split the polar vortex up and had a severe disruption with that, and that forced a lot of cold air southward, but not into North America. All that cold air has gone into Asia, and we have seen an extended run of significant cold mostly across Central and Eastern Asia, but also at times extending into Eastern Europe. But they've had a prolonged run of severe cold in that area. But at this point in time, that's pretty much where it has been staying. Now, if you look at years where you've had this extreme warmth across the U.S. as a whole during October and November, that's happened 6 times since 1950. And what I'm basically showing here on the right is just the 2 coldest years, the 2 warmest years, and the 2 years in between. So you can see really just having this extreme warmth in place thus far doesn't really provide much of an indication as to how the winter is going to end up. We have had a couple of years where it just pretty much kept on staying warm through the entire winter season, but also a couple of years where it turned significantly colder and we had some extreme cold across the country, and then a couple other years where it was pretty much average. So the bottom line there is that the fact that we've had a lot of warmth thus far doesn't really by itself provide any indication that the winter is going to be warmer or colder than normal. And again, it's pretty much even distribution between cold and warm years coming out of a very warm October and November period like we've had this year. But one thing that is interesting to note is that of those 6 years, the January and February period did tend to follow pretty much what happened in December. So if December was warm after the warm fall season, we tended to see that warmth pretty much persist right on through the end of the winter. Likewise, if we had a very cold December after a warm fall season, that colder air also tended to persist more or less through the end of the winter season. So we may have to look at December fairly closely to see if that pattern persists again this year. If we don't see a change happening during the month of December this year, that may be a better indication that we are going to see this pattern that we're in just persist right on through the bulk of the upcoming winter season. Now, we do have a weak La Niña in place across the Pacific Ocean, pretty much a borderline event. The map on the left is basically showing the SST anomaly patterns that we have in place currently, and the map on the right and the top shows a composite of similar analog years that had a similar overall SST pattern. The key area, generally speaking, is in the Western Pacific. It's the location of where the warmest water is that tends to drive tropical convection patterns, which in turn influence the jet stream across the Pacific, which has a large influence on the patterns across North America downstream of there. And so we tend to look very closely at where the warmest water is focused, and presently we are seeing a lot of it between the dateline and Indonesia, and that typically does promote or that is a region that does promote tropical convection activity that does often favor a scenario where you do see a west coast ridge and an east coast trough during the winter season. So we'll have to see if that does eventually develop. Presently this year, we've had most of the persistent tropical convection located west of there, over Indonesia or into the eastern Indian Ocean. There has been some shift toward east in that over time, but it has not yet focused and set up sort of in a semi-permanent area in the area where it really needs to be to help drive a colder U.S. pattern, but it has been generally trending eastward with time, so we may see if that does continue going forward and become a more favorable scenario. But on the bottom, there are composites of those years that had similar water temperature patterns to this year, and the overall composite there in the middle does show that the most likely area to see colder than normal weather during the winter season when you have a weak La Niña is across the upper Midwest areas of Dakotas, Minnesota. We have had some years there on the left where the cold air was very extensive, such as 2000, 2001. On the right-hand side, though, we've had some other years like 2005-06, which were, for the most part, warm across most of the country. However, one thing that is typical of La Niña winters in general is a lot of variability. So even the years that have been warm in terms of the winter season as a whole have usually seen at least one good strong shot of, period of cold for a couple of weeks across the country. So typically you don't see the warmth persist the entire winter season, even in the warm winters, and usually there is at least a period of time where we do see a stormier and much colder regime. It just may not be enough to have a large impact on the overall winter anomaly pattern. Now here on this page, we're seeing a plot of temperature anomalies for the December through February period, going all the way back to the late 90s. The top left there shows the 20-year anomalies and 10-year anomalies and 5-year anomalies relative to the 30-year normal. And then all the other maps are also relative to the 30-year normal. So obviously last winter was extremely warm, but we have had a number of very cold and very warm winters over the last decade or so. And the years that are surrounded by a blue box indicate years that we did have a La Niña in place. The dashed blue boxes in 2008-09 and 2005-06 were two winters where it was a borderline weak La Niña event. It was not officially classified as a La Niña, but was right near that borderline cutoff to be qualified as one, so I included those as well. The bottom line, though, is that La Niña winters tend to be very extreme one way or the other. We've had a lot of La Niña years that have been extremely warm and also some that have been extremely cold, and that is also a hallmark of La Niña where you do tend to see patterns that are highly amplified. So when it is warm, it tends to be anomalously warm to a large degree, to a high degree, and likewise the cold periods often tend to be very cold. So the years that have been dominated by more cold patterns have tended to see some very strong cold anomalies, such as 2010-11. On the other hand, years like 2011-12. The following winter, also a La Nina, was dominated by warmth, and the warmth was quite extreme for most of the winter seasons. So the bottom line, there is a large degree in variability between winter to winter during a La Nina, and high variability is kind of the hallmark of a La Nina pattern typically. Now, looking at some other forecasts that are out there, on the left here is the Weather Service forecast, the most recent one that I pulled from a couple days ago. They're also favoring a colder than normal north-central U.S., and if you remember from a couple slides back, that is the area that is most typically below normal during a weak La Nina pattern, and the southern tier of the country often tends to average above normal overall. On the right-hand side is the latest forecast from Judah Cohen with the AER and the National Science Foundation, and that forecast is based on fall snow cover and Arctic sea ice patterns that we've seen across Eurasia in the high Arctic, and based on what we've seen this year, their model there would tend to promote a little bit more widespread cold across the east than what the Weather Service forecast there is showing on the left. Now, most of the climate models, for the most part, are showing a warmer than normal pattern for the bulk of the U.S., pretty much a continuation of the current regime. And so there's, again, a lot of conflict there between what most of the climate models are showing in terms of a warm winter and what some of the indicators that you typically see with the La Nina and snow cover and things like that, which are favoring more cold air this winter. The slide here shows the current pattern on the left. Basically, we've had we've been seeing now in the last few days a general transition in the pattern after being very persistent for the last few months. We are starting to see finally a persistent trough, which has been in place across the Gulf of Alaska and the ridge across the middle part of the country, at least for a temporary period of time. That pattern is breaking down. We're seeing a strong move across the country here today and tomorrow, producing some blizzard conditions across portions of the plains and upper Midwest and the first heavy snowfall of the year in those areas. And that is ushering in a change to at least a short-term period of cold across the eastern half of the country. But it is going to also start a period of a much more active pattern, more storms, and in general less warmth than what we have seen. We are going to see the main ridge area kind of migrate northward in Canada, and that will allow for a little bit more of a trough to develop across the east coast and as well as across the west. And so those areas will be favored to average near or a little bit below normal going forward here the next few weeks, and that is also helping to drive the NAO sharply negative. And a lot of times when we do see this type of regime develop, the models can sometimes underestimate how much cold will actually be seen across the eastern U.S. So it's quite possible we'll see a little bit more cold than what some of the models are currently showing for the end of November to the first part of December. But a key issue here that we have this year is certainly the fact that we've had widespread extreme warmth across almost all of North America. So unlike a typical year where you would have a fair amount of cold already in place across at least northern Canada to actually tap and bring down when a strong storm like this current one moves through, we have, for the most part, very warm weather across all of Canada at the present time. And so as a result, we're not going to be able to transition this pattern very quickly into something that would produce widespread cold across the bulk of the U.S. And so it will take time, even if we do see a favorable regime develop here in the next few weeks, to first produce some actual cold air across Canada before that can actually come down and produce any kind of meaningful Arctic air across the lower 48. So while we are looking at the pattern trending colder in the near term, and we are going to see some more below normal days across portions of the eastern U.S., at least at times going forward into the end of November and first part of December, at this point there's no indications that we're going to be able to see a major Arctic outbreak through the beginning of December, just because we don't have any actual Arctic air in place across Canada to any great degree at this point in time. So as that does build with time, we'll have a better chance to see that kind of thing happen as we go further into December and later in the winter. But presently, in the near term, no major Arctic air, but just sort of more of a variable pattern with at least more below normal days, but not a major cold event here for the next few weeks. But looking at other factors, the MJO, which had been a non-issue for the last several months, is finally becoming more active. That we're seeing, again, more eastward progression of some of the tropical convection activity in the western Pacific, and seeing at least some progression of things versus what we had so far this fall. Again, the polar vortex was severely disrupted in October, a very unusual event where we actually saw it split. And we're seeing an additional intrusion of warmer air and disruption of the vortex going forward the next 2 weeks. And we actually may, in fact, see a high build over the pole in the stratosphere, which would lead to a complete reversal of the flow pattern there. And typically when you see that type of large disruption to the polar vortex in the stratosphere, that typically is an indication that you are going to see a persistent negative Arctic oscillation pattern, which drives colder air southward into the middle latitudes. Now, thus far, that has not produced any cold across North America, and there's no guarantee that it will going forward either, but it does at least suggests we are going to see that negative AO regime persist for probably most of December, and we are going to see more significant cold in the middle latitudes. The question will just be whether we actually can see some of that this go around in North America versus just having all of it stay in Europe and Asia. So again, the stratospheric pattern favors more cold going forward. And again, the MJO is currently favorable for more cold across the U.S. But again, with no cold air currently in place across Canada, there's not a high risk for a major cold shift here in the next couple of weeks. Now, looking at our current actual forecast, on the left here for temperatures, we are forecasting most of the western half of the country and the southern U.S. to average above normal. Again, the north central U.S., Great Lakes, Midwest area has the best chance to see below normal temperatures this winter. Again, though, if we do not see any cold develop here in the near term, going into the first part of December, the risk for that cold will be diminishing, so we'll have to watch that closely going forward here. The map on the right shows the global forecast for the upcoming December to February period. The areas where it has been cold across Asia are the areas that are most likely to stay cold going forward. Looking at the impacts of the rapid expansion of snow cover across Asia in October and the current sea ice patterns, the areas that tend to be cold with those types of regimes like we saw this year is Asia. That is the area that has the strongest correlation between those patterns and cold temperatures. So that is where the confidence is highest in terms of seeing a lot of cold going forward for the winter season. The cold across the U.S. is a much lower confidence one. Again, the confidence in the western U.S. warmth and the southern U.S. warmth is much higher. The question will be whether we can actually produce a period of cold across North America with this current evolution of the polar vortex that's developing as we head into December. So if we do not see a significant round of cold develop by sometime by the middle of December, the risk for the winter as a whole coming in below normal in those areas will be diminishing, and most likely we will see that warmth be more expansive than currently shown there across at least the plains, Midwest, and mid-Atlantic areas. Looking at precipitation, the northwestern U.S. and the Midwest areas have the best chance to average above normal in terms of precipitation. The southern tier is likely going to stay drier than normal. That's pretty typical of a La Niña type regime. In terms of snowfall on the right, the upper or northern half of the country has the best chance to see snowfall totals average above normal, while the southern U.S. Most likely will see snowfall at or below normal. But because snowfall totals tend to be dominated by single storm events across the southern half of the country, confidence in any snowfall forecast there is always very low. So it only takes one storm system to send most areas to above normal levels for snowfall, from areas from DC southward, for example, where snowfall normals are not very high. So confidence there is very low. Northern tier, where it's going to likely be wetter, and we are likely going to have a better chance to see cold, especially across the upper Midwest and Great Lakes area. That area is the highest confidence, as well as the Northern Rockies, for seeing above normal snowfall this winter season. So to summarize, again, we have a La Niña in place. It's fairly weak. It will not be a major driver of the pattern. Typically we do see colder air develop during December with similar patterns. If we don't see that happen this year, the odds of the winter as a whole being below normal across any large portion of the country will be greatly diminished. So we'll be watching those trends closely here in the next few weeks. But even mild La Niña winters do often see at least one major Arctic outbreak event, sometimes two. The 98-99 La Niña was extremely mild across the country, one of our warmest winters on record. However, we did actually have a 2-week period of very cold air, and 1 week in particular across the Midwest during January 99 that winter, when we set the all-time record low for the state of Illinois. So again, we often see major Arctic outbreaks at least once or twice during the winter season, even during a overall mild La Niña winter season. And even going down to Florida, the Florida citrus areas have an elevated risk for a freeze event during a La Niña, especially a weak La Niña winter, because again, we do see the Arctic outbreaks tend to be very strong when they do happen. They don't always happen very often during the winter, but when they do, they tend to be fairly strong. And so there will be an elevated risk across Florida for a possible freeze this winter. And again, given the stratospheric patterns this year, there is an elevated risk that we could see a major Arctic outbreak at some point before the end of the year or possibly in January. Confidence is very low at this point, given the fact that it's been staying warm across North America for the last several months, and the cold has been focused primarily across Asia. But given the overall evolution, there is going to be a better chance this go around than there was in October, November to see more cold on this side of the hemisphere as we head into December. So we'll have to watch that risk going forward. And again, snowfall, the best chance to see some major impact storms will be across the northern tier of the country, including most of the Midwest. So Chicago, for example, will have a better chance to see a major storm this winter. But most of the South will likely, for the most part, see less snow than average. But if we do see a major Arctic outbreak at some point in the season, we could also have the risk for a major ice event across the southern tier of the country, which also can be more common than typical when you have a La Niña winter in place like this year. So that's a summary, and that's all I have for the winter forecast. And so I'll pass it back to Mike at this time.
Thank you, Steve. At this time, we're going to hand it over to Mike. Mike, when you're ready, you may begin.
Yeah, I think you should be able to see my screen now, and I'll just start out and say it. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So, hi everybody. Welcome and thanks for participating. It's a perfect day to talk about winter weather, as I'm sitting here in the Rockies, and they just shut down I-70 for a snowstorm, and they just issued blizzard warnings for the upper Midwest. For tomorrow, so it's very apropos and things are happening. If you like to ski and if you're coming out, it could be a very well suited storm for you. I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about communication and storm situational awareness. We work with Everbridge pretty closely, and is really good at a global.
Mike, you cut out. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can. Yes.
You can hear me. Okay. Well, I'll hear a little bit. I was just talking about situational awareness and communications, where WDT provides world-class global weather information for situational awareness for companies across all spectrums of scale, manufacturing, energy. We work with Everbridge to provide that information to them, as they have the communication platform that companies can use to disseminate that information across their platform. The way we treat weather at WDT is all predicated upon listening to the client. So like I like to tell people, this blizzard warning for Minneapolis is not uncommon. For Atlanta, it would be a nightmare. And so when we listen to a company, we find out how weather affects your businesses, where their locations are located, and then into what we call a forecast funnel, which you see on my screen here. The forecast funnel is really a situational awareness funnel as far out in the future as we can project it, letting the asset managers or the personnel, environmental safety managers know exactly what they can expect at a given location or in a region. We allow the customers to customize their forecast for the particular geography, climate, area of the world they're concerned in, and they can set those thresholds. And the way we work those thresholds is that it allows you to get a daily forecast planner for a location depending on to help set, and we'll work with you in best practices, or if you're already aware of that, it's very easy to interface and do that. And so we can provide this on a daily basis. Get it in the morning, coffee, you can look at this. If you've got red or yellow that you're concerned about, take action, rainy, clutch business. So the weather now becomes a proactive piece that if you're looking forward, it's watching for you and what your assets and what you're concerned about.
Mike, you must have cut completely out. We can't hear you at all.
Well, that's just bizarre, because I can hear you guys just fine. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So I apologize for that, everybody. It must be the storm I talked about. We provide these tools to let you know that we have concerns over a wide geography of what could affect your location as it's coming down the pipe. as the event gets closer, and within 2 days, you'll start getting what we call weather checks, which is the same green, yellow, red, only this is broken down into 2-hour increments for 48 hours. We have companies that use this, for example, to decide if they're going to tell employees to come late, early, if they have to be concerned about moving inventory around, shutting down operations during a certain part of the day. It really lets them fine-tune how they want to manage their operation based on the weather. And this little weather check, as we call it, is a really good tool for that. So I'm just going to keep going, assuming you guys can still hear me. We provide, as the funnel or the event might start happening, we'll actually start providing storm advisories and alerts, short-fused, event-driven stuff, National Weather Service alerts, WDT, custom alerts, details on the timing, arrival, threat type, amount, if they're going to have any kind of what the storm parameters. Somebody could tell you there's a severe thunderstorm, but what does that really mean? We're going to tell you what the attributes of that thunderstorm is. Those tools will be available both on desktop and on mobile, because not everybody's in front of their desk, and so we have companion apps that convert all that. And finally, we allow certain clients who need access to meteorological support to actually have access to talk to our meteorologists. We can get on the phone with conference calls. We can be proactive in that regard. We have had many a time where we've talked in major tropical events or major winter storm events where we've had executive boards on the phone with our meteorologists discussing what they can expect for ETA, ETD of the storm, the conditions and things like that. That's mine in a nutshell. Michael, sorry about the audio stuff. If you want to take it back and go from there, we'll answer questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. So at this point, we're going to hand it over to my colleague, Michael Matonis. When you're ready, Michael, you may begin.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks also to WDT. Very helpful and very informative as well. First off, let me just talk a little bit about Everbridge to give those of you on the phone who might not be as familiar with Everbridge as others. Everbridge has been around for about 14 years. We have, really are there as a solution to provide critical information to keep people safe, and businesses running. And we've done that through our platform, but also through partnering with groups like WDT in terms of trying to get the, the appropriate information into folks' hands as necessary. And we do, really work through all sorts of different levels of communication as well. It's not necessarily just about emergency communications, although, the terrorist events, natural disasters, and such are a concern. But we also work in much more operational scenarios, so that, from IT outages to community communication events, perhaps, like around Super Bowl 50, and with employee safety, okay? We have just over 3,000 enterprise customers, and as you can see here, we do have a fairly strong representation of those customers across lots of different verticals. We don't focus on any given single vertical in the out there. We do have a good representation of clients across all verticals, and we really try to provide a solution that helps our clients to communicate with their employees, their citizens, their constituents as is appropriate for them. Okay, we are also recognized as a market leader. We've been the leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for past 2 cycles of mass notification. And we recently, earlier this fall, we did list on the NASDAQ and had a successful IPO, and we're listed on the NASDAQ under the stock ticker EVBG. Now, in terms of the platform, Everbridge is, that's really the best word we can use here. We are a platform. We're a communications platform so that you can use this to communicate with folks. We have a very robust platform with APIs, rules, locations, notification engine, et cetera. And the capabilities on top of that, being able to locate people, being able to assess threats, being able to communicate being able to automate, allows us to really have many different types of applications in the system. All right, today we'll be focusing mostly, obviously, on the weather integration, but mass notification, safety connection, IT alerting, incident management, secure messaging, all these different applications that we've built on top of our platform, so that you can effectively, help your employees, your citizens, stay safe. So like I said, today we want to focus really on that smart weather integration, as we refer to it. So this is the partnership between Everbridge and WDT, where, as Mike mentioned at the tail end of his presentation, we get the tactical weather information from WDT. We get the radar-based feeds. We get the location-based services, et cetera, from the WDT side of things. Everbridge provides the targeted communication, the mobile accessibility, the global reach of these functionalities, and we bring it together for that smart weather, what we refer to as the smart weather integration. So specific map-driven, automated, rules-based, and targeted. Okay. And what you'll see in the Everbridge platform from that perspective is, we have the ability to have our contacts in the system notified based on actual weather events that might be happening. Okay. So when we look at the integration here, when you look at the slide deck that we're showing, the dots that you see on the map here, and this is Massachusetts, obviously, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Northeast. But the dots that you see in the map, those are all going to represent contacts in our system. Okay, possibly their home address, their office address, et cetera. But each of those represents contacts that we have in the system. And then the shapefile, the purple shaded area, that's information that we're getting from WDT. Okay, these are the alerts, the weather alerts that we are being passed through by Weather Decision Technologies. So that could be, a blizzard warning like they're dealing with out in Colorado today. That could be a freeze warning or a tropical storm warning for some of the Gulf areas or the state of Florida, perhaps. But all the different, I believe there's about 118 different weather alert types that we can get from the system, from WDT, that we can then leverage to send notifications to all of our affected people. Okay, and we can have that done either manually by an administrator of the system or by a message operator, or we can have that done automatically. Our contacts can go in and subscribe for automatic feeds from those, or automatic notifications from those weather feeds. All right, so we can see, have people get the information that's important to them at a given time. All right. What we also can get from the Weather Decision Technology side of things is they're going to provide us with animated satellite and infrared radar, okay, so that we can see what's coming. As a global operator or as a national operator, I might want to look at what the weather looks like across the country, all right, and I might want to be able to see what is coming in my direction. These types of tools allow us to see what type of weather is coming and whether or not that's going to impact any of my people that might be in the area of a particular storm. All right. And again, also that ability to have that rules-based communication. All right. Have the messages go to the appropriate audiences. Have them go to different audiences based on where they are, what their role is, what their location is. If an alert comes in and, for instance, if someone has signed up for, weather alerts, they might, only get alerts, for thunderstorm watches, okay? But maybe once it goes to the level of being a warning, the fact that we've actually have that happening, that more severe event, then we're going to look at automatically notifying those folks. So there's a number of things that we can do there in terms of notifying the appropriate audiences, make sure that we're kicking off the business continuity plans, and make sure that our people are safe. Ask people to, if we know there's weather coming, if we know there's a storm coming, ask people to work from home on a particular day, or make sure that the employees are taking weather into account when they are asked to report to work. And have different messages be able to go out to your operations team, to your communities, your employees, and possibly even integrate with sirens, message sirens or external voice type scenarios. Okay, make sure that we reach the appropriate audiences with the different messages that are coming from the system. Okay. So what do we need to do? Well, we really need to plan, how do we communicate this? And a big part of, once we get the information from WDT, well, what is Everbridge going to bring to the forefront there? And really a lot of that is about your ability to reach people in the event of an emergency. All right, we already currently have, messaging capabilities in 200 plus countries. We have over 100 different device types and modalities that we can send messages to. And last year in 2016, we sent just over 1 billion messages. And we're on track for about 1.5 billion this year, I believe, not a little bit above that number. But what's important about to remember is that no single delivery path is ever 100% reliable. Okay, we want to, and we've seen that, during, especially during weather events or during, perhaps terrorists, such as the, terrorist events like the Orlando shooting or the Boston bombing, et cetera, communication modes can degrade very quickly. We see quite often that, just voice calls, cell calls don't get through when there's high load on the systems. Okay, so we really make sure that we give you those different modalities to communicate with. We know that no single delivery path, SMS is not always going to be 100% reliable, and even the best delivery paths are not going to be reliable 100% of the time. The other thing that we can do from a weather perspective is we can try and leverage social intelligence. All right, so we have the ability to set up different types of thresholds and alerts based off of information that's coming through social media. Perhaps we want to track to see if, in this case, folks were referencing Hurricane Sandy. See if we're getting any information about Hurricane Sandy. See if people are, from a municipality standpoint, see if anyone is geocoding their tweets about problems about downed trees, about down power lines, et cetera, that might be happening in my area, and that I need to go and make sure that I can get my facilities, get my operations folks mobilized to go and address issues like this that might be a public health, public safety problem. Okay.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to Mike and Steve. So at this time, we're going to move over to our Q&A session. As a reminder, if you're looking to ask a question, you can do so by selecting the questions drop-down in the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. Just make sure you submit it to all panelists. And before we get started, we have a couple questions that have come in regarding, will the slides and recording be available? So they will be. Anyone who registered for the webinar, regardless if they attended or not, will be sent the slides and the recording within a day or so. So if you dropped off at one point or joined us late, you will get the webinar in its entirety included with the slides. So with that being said, let's begin the Q&A. The first question is for Steve. Steve, Jack in the audience would like to know, since there's uncertainty with, there's high uncertainty rather with La Niña, how is that different than El Nino?
Well, in the general sense, when you have an El Nino in place, the forcing pattern from the Pacific is very different, and so the types of sort of different scenarios that can come out of that tend to vary a lot. A common factor with an El Nino is you tend to have a stronger jet stream across the southern part of the country and a more suppressed storm track across the U.S. You often see storm systems track across the southern U.S. and up the East Coast. And for the most part, La Niñas, you tend to see that farther north. A key difference between El Nino and La Niña in general in terms of the overall U.S. pattern is that typically, the northern tier of the U.S. and most of Canada typically does average above normal during an El Nino winter. There have been some exceptions when you have a weak El Nino in particular, which does tend to favor more of a colder eastern U.S. regime. But the La Niñas tend to feature a more high amplitude pattern in the northern jet stream across not just the U.S. but globally, and so you do tend to see stronger anomalies on the warm and the cold side where they occur. Whereas with the El Nino, you tend to see more of a stronger west to east flow across the country. You tend to see milder Pacific air flow across a lot of the northern part of the U.S. and Canada, and you can sometimes be below normal across the southern U.S. and the eastern U.S. when you do tend to see a lot of storms happen, especially. But the overall patterns in terms of where it's cold and where it's warm tend to be different. When you have a super El Nino like last year, you do tend to see those really strong warm extremes across many areas. But otherwise, there is, for the most part, much more storminess, more variability. The La Niña pattern, though, in general, tends to favor a much more high amplitude pattern. And so the areas that are warm tend to be extremely warm. The areas that are cold tend to be extremely cold. But those areas are not always consistent from one regime to the other, and that is a large reason why there is a high degree of variability with the La Niña, because with this winter, the areas that are going to be cold across the northern hemisphere will typically be well below normal, like currently we're seeing that in Asia, temperatures running 20, 30 degrees below normal in areas there. So the cold events, when they happen, tend to be far colder than the cold events that happen with an El Nino. Typically, when it's cold with that type of winter, it's just more persistent, moderate cold, whereas La Niña tends to be extreme shot of cold, then highly anomalous warmth, and another extreme shot of cold when it happens. So there's much larger swings from one extreme to the other with the La Niña regime.
Thank you, Steve. So the next question is actually for you, Mike Gauthier. It's from Alvin in the audience. He wants to know, is there a limit on number of assets that can be monitored by the WDT weather check tool?
No, it's unlimited. We have a very large scale capability at this time, and we do some very, very large retailers right now in multiple countries with tens of thousands of locations.
Thank you. There's actually another question. So just to clarify, Matt in the audience wanted to know, Mike, is WDT global, or is it only a North American-based provider?
Global. We provide these services everywhere on the planet and on the oceans as well. We do quite a bit of work with oil and gas exploration in all of the major oceans and seas, and all over the earth.
Thank you. Next question is for Michael Matonis. Michael, Jeff in the audience wants to know, he has contractors in the Southeast, and during hurricane season, he unfortunately doesn't have all their information to contact them with their notification system. Does Everbridge have any way to have them easily sign up or be able to sign up to his service?
Yeah, there's absolutely. There's with each Everbridge organization, you can set up what we refer to as a member portal, and that gives you an opportunity to expose a website, a web URL that your folks can go to and register and opt in to receive alerts, so that you can have that set up in one of two ways. It could either be what we refer to as a public portal, which is what we see most municipalities do, where anyone can go in and log into the system and register for alerts, like a state level or a county level government, or we can set that up as a private portal where you can sort of seed the database with your employees and their an employee and their email address, and then invite them to the portal so they can go and give you additional information like an SMS, cell number, home phone, etc., things along those lines.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. So the next question is for you, Steve. Brett in the audience wants to know, what do you expect the weather impact to be in Texas over the next couple months His follow-up to that was, we don't tend to get much snow, but more often ice and freezing rain. Do you expect any of that in the upcoming months?
Well, in general, I think by and large we're going to be above normal, across the south central U.S. in general, including Texas. But there is, I think, going to be a couple opportunities for, a strong cold event to happen at some point during December, and then again in January, and that would extend all the way down, likely through Texas and into northern Mexico, where there would be an opportunity for an ice storm to happen. It's always difficult to project whether or not that area will get one, since you have to have the cold air and a storm come along at just the same time, and that's always pretty hit and miss. But there is, I think, an elevated chance of that happening this year. It's difficult to project exactly where across Texas or the South in general that might happen this year. But with this year, we are likely going to see again 1 or 2 shots of pretty significant cold that will come down that far. I'll just be a question of whether or not we can get a storm at the same time and actually produce that type of icing event. But that's not an unusual scenario with this type of setup that we have this year.
Thank you, Steve. Next question is for Michael Matonis. Ron in the audience wants to know, I noticed you are using social media to draw information. Are you using a third-party solution to draw that information, or are there other options, social media options offered by Everbridge?
That's a great question. The social media integration that you saw in that screenshot, we are pulling that information directly from Twitter via Twitter's API, based on configurable settings within each person's organization. We have some other solutions and some other partnerships with different threat assessment and solutions that provide us with additional information that's pulled out of social media. And if that's something you're interested in investigating a little bit further, definitely something that you could either contact your account manager if you're an existing client, or definitely call into our sales group, and we can talk to you a little bit more about those different options moving forward.
Thank you, Michael. So we're going to get to one more question before we end the webinar. We have quite a few very specific product questions that what I'm going to do is make sure your account manager from Everbridge customers, your account manager will send the questions to, so they can follow up with you directly. So we definitely will get to them just offline and make sure that you guys get the appropriate answers. So with that being said, Steve, we have one more question from Keegan in the audience. And his question is, are there any elevated concerns with the warm water, this winter?
Elevated concerns in what way? Was there any clarification on that?
At least from your forecast with the warm water that you showcase?
Well, I'm not exactly sure where to go with the answer to that. If it's related to like the El Nino, La Nina issues that we have, and warmth along the West Coast and that kind of thing. Typically the warmth in the Pacific Ocean and the tropics is typically what drives the pattern, and that looks to be fairly consistent in terms of what it's likely going to do here the next few months. That there is, as you go farther out in time, more uncertainty with how the La Nina will evolve and how quickly it will weaken as we head through the end of the winter season. But typically there is a month or two delay between when you see any kind of significant change in the tropics in terms of water temperatures and a large scale impact on the pattern across the U.S. So the way things look right now, we're not likely to see any kind of major change in the water temperature patterns across the Pacific. So I think as long as nothing dramatic happens in the next several weeks, anything that did change, there would likely be more of an impact for the very tail end of winter into the spring season and next summer, and less so for the core of this upcoming winter, since we are getting fairly close to that at the present time. So there's no I think major risk for a large change there, but just the fact that we have a weak La Niña in place does create more uncertainty. The pattern is much more certain as a rule when you have a very strong La Niña or a strong El Niño, where you have a much more defined forcing taking place in the Pacific Ocean from those events. But when they're much weaker like they are now, the range of scenarios is basically becomes a lot larger.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you to Mike and Michael for your great presentations and participating in this Q&A session. Lastly, Brett, one of our audience members, Brett Adams, would like to know what customers that we mutually have in Texas. So Brett, we'll definitely follow up with you offline with that and let you know who we have as references that you can reach out to. So with that being said, we're going to conclude today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, recording and slides will be available within a day or so. So hold tight on that. We'll send that directly via email. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today and thank our presenters again for a great presentation. Have a great day, everyone.